Most of Week 2 is in the books, and it started back on Thursday night with an NFC clash between the Vikings and Eagles. The Eagles ended up winning with a score of 34-28, and I think there's a few takeaways for Philly. Number one, Jalen Hurts is not where he needs to be yet in order for this team to get back to the Super Bowl. But that's fine. It will take them time to get back to where they were from a passing standpoint last year, but the run game will help them out in a big way, and they more than found their back in DeAndre Swift. My only concern with the Eagles moving forward is, well, of course, Jalen at the moment, but I think he will be fine in the long run, and I really hope they don't wear DeAndre down before the playoffs start, especially with his injury history. For Minnesota, the few takeaways I had are if this team wants to get back to the playoffs this year, which they still can, by the way, Kirk will need to throw for 5,000 yards. Period. Their run game on both sides of the ball is bad, and I don't think that's going to change too much over the course of the year. Playing the dominant Eagles line on both sides of the ball only emphasized that, but I think it was evident that the Vikings' run game and run defense are not going to be good enough this year. And heading to Sunday's action, we started Western New York to discuss the Raiders and Bills. For Las Vegas, this was an opportunity to turn the page and start a new era and go into a hostile environment and, hell, not necessarily win, but compete and show you're ready to at least compete with the best of the best. But a 38-10 trouncing in a game where you held the ball for just 20 minutes, and in a game where you were outgained by 210 yards and outrushed by nearly 130 yards, was certainly not what the Raiders had in mind when they flew from Vegas to Buffalo. They also lost the turnover battle 3-0, and I don't think Josh McDaniels will ever lead this team to serious success, and I'd rather start looking for a new guy to lead the team sooner rather than later. So I do think the end of the McDaniels era should again come sooner rather than later. For Buffalo, this was everything you imagined in a bounce-back game after a tough loss to the Jets in Week 1. Josh was the good version of Josh, the run game was going, and 9 different players caught a pass. This was nearly a textbook game for the Bills from start to finish, and this is the Josh Allen all of Western New York loves, and the guy who can take this team a long way. Staying in the AFC, we are going to Houston to discuss Colts-Texans. For the time Anthony Richardson played in this game, I thought he looked good, and I think he can be a starter for a long time in the NFL. We, of course, wish him the best and hope he can get healthy as soon as possible. But even without Richardson, the run game looked good, Gardner looked good, and this was the type of win for the Colts that they would love to have in the future, minus AR getting hurt, of course. And that's from a trenches standpoint, as we know the Colts secondary is bad, and granted, TJ threw for nearly 400 yards, but heading into the fourth quarter up 21 points will lead for a lot of time for opposing quarterbacks to rack up numbers. For Houston, there was no ground game to speak of, and when you have a rookie quarterback, you need a good ground game. Obviously, the offensive line getting hurt doesn't help that, and that's going to limit what you can do, and especially when the defense plays bad. This is a rebuilding team, but their rookie quarterback looks solid, all things considered. From Houston to Tampa to discuss Bears, Bucs, and Bears fans, I think it's time for a conversation we've been desperately trying to avoid, and it's that it may be time to move on from Justin Fields this offseason. Yes, this is a rebuilding team, but 2 double-digit losses to start the year to the Bucs and Packers is certainly not how they envision to start the 2023 season. Period. Bears fans don't have a lot to expect heading in because they are rebuilding, but still come out disappointed, and that's the story through 2 games. Luke Getsy, enough with the screens. For Tampa, this was the annual Mike Evans explosion game, and what a time to have it to propel the Bucs to a 2-0 start. Tampa will win a lot of games like this because Todd Bowles is a good defensive coach. If they simply hold teams to under 20 points, which with the playmakers they have defensively is possible, Tampa is going to be a quiet contender as long as Baker does not throw them out of games, and that's the big takeaway. Tampa can make noise as long as they simply do not lose games. Staying in both the NFC North and South, we go to the Big A to discuss Packers-Falcons. This is an extremely frustrating loss for the Packers as they couldn't get off the field, and not only could they not get off the field, but they and everyone knew what Atlanta was going to do and still couldn't stop it. Atlanta ran the ball 45 times in this game for 211 yards for an average of 4.7 yards per carry. Pairing Bijan Robinson behind that offensive line is tough as hell for any opposing defense to deal with, and there's a reason the Falcons are 2-0 and will quietly compete this year, but this was a game Green Bay could have easily won. And forget the Jordan Love situation for a minute, but Matt LaFleur is going to, and should by the way, face a lot of criticism for bringing Joe Barry back. I also acknowledge how many players Green Bay had out, but in this situation, what a brutal loss. For Atlanta, Bijan is him. I absolutely loved him coming out of Texas, as a lot of people did, and games like this are why. He is a unit, and I know people are going to get sick of hearing about Bijan and how good he is, but the hype is warranted. Atlanta's next 2 games in Detroit and in Jacksonville will be a real test, but for now they're 2-0, and I do think they will quietly make noise. And speaking of the Jags, we are heading down to Jacksonville to discuss Jags-Chiefs. Out of any of the losses from Week 2, the Jags lost to the Chiefs, considering the circumstances and how being up 2 games on this team when it comes to seeding for the playoffs later in the year may be the most frustrating of any. KC had 3 turnovers on the day and was looking ugly offensively, and it was very un-Kansas City relative to the team we know. But Jacksonville couldn't capitalize, and in this game alone, KC had 12 penalties for 94 yards to the Jags 2 for 10. 9 points is unacceptable, and especially against this team. They were 0 of 3 in the red zone, and Trevor didn't play great either. This was a monumental loss when you factor everything in for the Jags. For Kansas City, shout out the defense, and they play Chicago next week and the Jets the following week, so there is a very good chance this team could be 3-1 through 4 games. But they were lucky to escape Jacksonville with a win in Week 2. From Northeast Florida to Nashville to converse about the Chargers and Titans. My biggest fear for the Chargers entering the season was Brandon Staley, and my biggest fear for the Chargers through 2 weeks is Brandon Staley. And through 2 games, they've allowed 877 yards of opposing offense, and you guessed it, they are 0-2. This is one of the most talented rosters and most underperforming rosters in all of football, and it was certainly a choice to bring back Brandon Staley after last year. And as much as I want Staley gone, the offense had 2 opportunities to win the game in regulation and failed before going 3-and-out in overtime. Justin Herbert hasn't been great so far in 2023. He hasn't been bad, but he hasn't been Justin Herbert. And for the Titans, this was the type of game I thought Ryan Tannehill could consistently have. Not necessarily an 83.3 completion percentage every game, but this type of game of managing and getting the ball to the playmakers and letting them go to work will come out with a win more often than not. And the pass rush led by Simmons, Autry, and Landry will cause problems in this conference. To Motor City to discuss Seahawks-Lions, and this was the Geno Smith I expected in 2023. Geno was superb in this game as he threw for over 325 yards and 2 touchdowns and did a tremendous job of spreading the ball around. The run game wasn't great for Seattle, as the backup offensive line will generally do that, but they held up in pass protection and did their job. For the Lions, Jerry Jacobs was not good in Week 2, and that's an understatement. For anyone who didn't watch this game, he was bad and was picked on a lot. And for as much as I love what the Lions have done with their rebuild so far and everything they've done over the past few years, the defense at times is still stuck spinning tires in the mud, and games like this show. And it's magnified times 100. They play Atlanta in Week 3 and Green Bay on a short week in Week 4, so they will need to correct this and quick. But the next 2 games, specifically those games against Atlanta and Green Bay, will be very telling for the Lions. Down I-75 to Cincy to discuss Ravens-Bengals, and this is a very good rivalry, and this game only added to the rivalry. A huge credit goes to Baltimore to be down as many men as they were and to come out of Paycor Stadium with a hard-fought win. Cincy wanted to start 0-2 as much as anybody, and Baltimore ran for nearly 180 yards and outgained them by 130 yards, and Lamar was efficient passing the football. I thought they had a great first-round pick in Zay Flowers nearly 6 months ago, and I still think that today. He is a great player and a guy this team has needed for years. For Cincinnati, guys, this is a problem. Joe is not Joe, and the play calling is bad, and the Bengals were also outcoached in this game. Starting slow is not a good excuse, especially in this conference. Can the Bengals bounce back? Yes, of course, especially with that trio offensively. But this is not ideal, and if you think just because they're the Bengals that they'll go back to the AFC Championship game, or even the Super Bowl, the AFC may have different plans for them. Zach Taylor needs to be better. Out to the desert, and when this game started, I thought we were going to be talking about the Giants in a much different manner. I'm still not confident in this team, and I think they will get beat on Thursday by the 49ers, and by at least a touchdown, but congratulations on the comeback win. The second half was much different than the first half, and as cliche as this sounds for New York, please do more of that. And no matter how serious the injury is, we hope Saquon comes back soon and that it is not serious. For Arizona, it's going to be a lot of the same this year for weekly takeaways, but you're 0-2 and the Texans are 0-2, and that's the best news for this team, and specifically competitive losses. You don't want to lose by 35 or 40 points, and while you don't want to lose by giving up a 3-touchdown lead, losing by 7 total points in 2 games is a great way for the Cardinals season to start. Next up is the 49ers-Rams game, and I have a few takeaways. Nick Bosa has been a step slow to start the year, and I think he will be fine by the time the playoffs roll around, but the Rams did a pretty good job of tuning him out in week 2, and a major credit goes to them. And the other big takeaway I have from this game that rolled over from week 1 is while the Rams don't have the most talent in the NFL, they will go to war for Sean McVay every single week and expect to win, and that says something. They were in this game without one of the best players in all of football in Cooper Kupp, and without a few key mistakes. Granted, you could say this about every team, but without a few key mistakes, the Rams, who were perceived to be competing for Caleb Williams before the season started, could have beat the contending 49ers. This game brought the Niners back down to earth after a beatdown in week 1, which they gave the Steelers, but they are very serious Super Bowl contenders. From SoFi to the Lone Star State, we go to discuss the Jets and Cowboys, and this is about what I expected from the Jets offense in this game. Outside of Zach Wilson, they had 11 carries for 28 yards, and the Cowboys game plan, and every team's game plan moving forward, is simple. Force Zach Wilson to beat them, and that's exactly what Dallas did. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, maybe it was a bad game, and maybe they'll still compete for a Super Bowl or any of that. The best the Jets can hope for every week is to not turn the ball over and hope the defense plays like they did in week 1. But a big credit goes to Dallas for putting this game out of reach and for not keeping the Jets in the game because they very easily could have. CD had a hell of a game, and the Cowboys have put up 70 points to 10 points allowed on the year. Whether you think they are the same old Cowboys or not, do not take them lightly. From Dallas to the Mile High City for Commanders Broncos, and I think this game is a representation of where each franchise is headed. The Commanders have a bright future, which was aided by the sale from Dan Snyder, but the Broncos have been a complete disaster since the Russell Wilson era started. Even the final touchdown of the game, for as exciting as that was, they couldn't convert the 2-point conversion. And I mean this in a sense of how the Broncos' last year and a half has gone, but the team not getting the PI call is fitting. I disagree with the no call at the end, and I do feel bad for Broncos fans because the difference between 1-1 and 0-2 is huge. But here's the bottom line. Don't blow an 18-point lead to the Sam Howell-led Commanders at home in the first place, and you don't have to worry about that. And I don't see a positive ending to all of this for Denver. But what I hope you enjoyed was the Week 2 recap, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe, as only about 23% of people watching are subscribed, and it makes a massive difference. Until the next video, please be safe, and have a great day. Love you guys.